Why don't we get started, guys? You saw some coming through the door. As you know, this is an interest session on site calling, and I would like to begin by, I thought possibly the best way to begin would be to indicate something of the background of how site calling came about. I don't think anyone invented it, and to provide some kind of insight possibly into the reasons that, I think that's interesting for us to know, that we lost that speaker. They have a loose wire, is that right? So it's okay now, okay. Is to present some kind of background as to, I think site calling evolved because it needed to evolve, and what the background is, what the reasons for its evolution were, might be of interest to precede our discussions here. Way back, and I'm sure that many of you out there go back that far, I know I do, when we learned to call, you learned a little poem, 8, 9, 10 lines, and every little line rhymed. And as a matter of fact, I remember when you went to the square dance shop to buy your records, you also bought little books that had rhyming patterns in it, all the moon, June, spoon rhymes that you could use. And everything rhymed very neatly. And you memorized these little poems, and if you, in those days, if you learned one poem, you knew a whole tip. You did it twice to the heads and twice to the sides, and it was neat. And if you learned 8 poems, you were a caller, so you can call 8 tips. And whenever a visiting caller came to town, or whenever you heard some other caller, he called a poem that you hadn't heard before, or you saw one in the books or the magazines that you may have subscribed to, you learned another poem, why, maybe you added one more tip to your repertoire. The way square dancing evolved from that was that we began to find that it was interesting and fun for the dancers to change some of those poems and maybe change the choreography of the dance that we had memorized, so the dancer got something a little unexpected once in a while, and we began to then change the poetry a little bit and make the poems a little longer sometimes, and memory after a while got to be a problem. We couldn't retain all that. I suspect you'll find that if you stop and think about what memory is like pouring something into a glass of water. You can, when that glass is full, you can pour more water into that, but something's got to stop out. It can't be any fuller than that. Now, memory is like a muscle, and you can train your memory to develop a larger glass in which to pour that water. That's a long process, and it takes a certain amount of practice and actual discipline to do that. But for a while, you'll find that your memory will retain so much. And the kind of choreography that we began to develop and began to want to call, we found that memory wasn't the way to go, and several things had to be done. And one of the things that happened, the first thing that happened, was some guys began to put all the little poems on cue cards, and they read this everything. That was, for many obvious reasons, not the most desirable, so we went to a controlled memory kind of system, which we now call modules, where you learned little pieces of choreography that were interchangeable, and you can interchange from one to the other and switch back and forth from one to the other. And we were still doing a memorized kind of a thing, but even that got to be too much. We needed some kind of capability to improvise and create choreography as we went along. This is all fanciful. I wasn't there when all this happened, you understand, but I rather suspect that this is the way it came about. Well, you were, but I was, The point being that we needed to find some way to allow a caller to create, on an improvised kind of basis, the kind of choreography that the activity required of him. And site calling, I don't think any one guy invented it. I think it developed in various parts of the world, the square dance world, at roughly the same time, and after a while they began to, we still have a variety of site calling methods. We'll talk about some of them here. But that was, I think, the background of how site calling came about and why we needed it. It is my view that today, with some obvious exceptions, a successful caller today really should know how to site call at any level. I think site calling is an important tool. It allows him to do, it frees him to do all kinds of creative choreography as his program or the needs of the moment may dictate to him. And the technique is, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've felt, has really taken off, and more guys, and I would suspect that most callers today are doing site calling in one form or another. It might be helpful to decide what site calling is. I look at side calling as a means, a technique by which the caller is able to sustain and regain control of the people in his square, people on the floor, to control his choreography. He can improvise choreography, and then at his discretion, when he is ready, he can put together an arrangement of dances that will allow him then to successfully resolve the square. We kind of think of side calling as having four basic phases or parts, and we like to think of them as pick 'em, stick 'em, tear 'em, and snare 'em. The first thing you must do is pick some key people. What the resolution process ultimately will involve is the use of certain key people to tell you, to use those key people to rearrange or to engineer or to arrange all 8 people where you need them to be. You have to pick 2 couples typically. Then we have a square on the floor. I want to demonstrate one very interesting point. Can we have one square on the floor quickly here? I'll have you sit down again in a moment. I just want to point one thing out. I need 2 more Sterling couples. We're not going to do any dancing. I just want to show you how we might go about selecting people. One more couple, please. Super. We sometimes hear that the requirement for the selection of key people is the selection of any 2 adjacent couples. And while that is indeed true, it is not by no means absolutely required. What you need to do is to allow, if you understand symmetric choreography, what you need to do is to take 4 people who will tell you where the other 4 are. If you, for example, pick couples 1 and 4, who are indeed adjacent couples now, wherever they are, they will tell you where their opposite people are. If you know where gent number 1 is, you will always know where gent number 3 is. If you know where lady number 1 is, you will always know where lady number 1 is. If you know where gent number 4 is, you always have a handle on gent number 2. If you know where lady number 4 is, you always have a handle on lady number 4. Now, in that case, when you have the adjacent couples, that works very easily. But you don't really absolutely require it. It is possible, although I know no one who uses it. If you know, for example, gent number 1 and gent number 4 and lady number 2 and lady number 3, those 4 people will also give you a handle on all 8. But the reason that we like to have adjacent couples is that if you have non-paired people, you don't have that partner relationship to help you. If we know gent number 1 and his partner, and gent number 4 and his partner, or lady number 1 and her partner, or lady 4 and her partner, that gives us one more handle, one more way to keep some control. And what we like to pick generally is a key man, let's use gent number 1 in this case, a key man, his corner, because we need that corner relationship, and their respective partners. Those of you who side call, I'm sure will agree with me that a very, very common error, certainly you find this in caller schools a lot, a very common error of side callers, or student side callers who are learning how to side call, they will pick, say, couples 1 and 4, then when it's time to do the alla man left, they will alla man left gent number 4 with lady number 1. What liar has not had that happen to him? For that reason, we like to think, cut that out. For that reason, we like to think of the selection of the key people as a key man, his corner, and their respective partners. That'll give you then those 4 adjacent people that you're looking for, but it'll also give you some kind of a handle on what their relationships are that will be important later on down the road. Thank you, guys. You may sit down. You did a sterling job. Excellent. The question sometimes arises, how many do you use? How many key people do you use? How many key squares do you use? The answer must be as many as you can handle, as many as possible. The greater control you have, the better off you are. I know some guys tell me they can look at 6 squares. They take the front 6 squares. I don't often have a front 6 squares. I don't have 6 squares sometimes. But we do need to have as many as you can handle. What I typically like to do, and I'm sure these gentlemen will give you some other insight on that as they get on the microphone, is I will take one key square who are the one that the criteria I like to use, I want to pick the safest square, the one that I will judge has the least potential to break down. I will then cite my first routine on them. I now own them. They are mine. Now I will then go to another square and cite on them, pick 2 people in that square, and now I'll resolve them home. I now own 2. Then I'll try to a third one. I then own 3. What I find in my case is by the time I get to number 3, number 1's starting to get fuzzy. I'm beginning to forget who belongs to whom and so on. So I can generally handle 3. Most often, I'm really sure of 2. So the answer to the question then would be as many as possible. I like to pick my key squares in various parts of the hall so that I get some kind of overview of what's going on in the hall. We've all seen this night caller who looks at one square and calls like this all night long, right? Do you have a question, sir?
Well, I'm very curious when you go in the hall, it's the first shift that maybe you don't know all the people in the hall, or maybe they're all sort of strange to you. That first shift that you saw, you're picking one in the field.
No. Okay. The question is, the very first tip, in a situation where you don't know the dancers, you're going out of town, you have no handle on the dancers at all, what do you do? The first tip, do you memorize? Or use memorized material. I like to cite them right away. As they're squaring up, I will pick at random, and then the selection process is, and this is old hat, I'm sure, to most of you. You use color, you use height, bald heads, mustaches. That's for the girls. I used to pick my key people based on, with the ladies, on cleavage. But I find that very detrimental to your concentration, though, and I had to give it up. But whatever outstanding feature that you can find that will help you identify those key people, and the typical one, and the most obvious one, of course, is color. Another interesting thing, this does not usually work the very first tip, but I'm picking key people. That one's out again? I am picking key people during the round dance. You get a real good view, not yet. You get a real good view of color. You can pick a red couple or a yellow couple or a green couple. You get a real good view of, I find this, that the round dancers typically can be counted upon to be the better square dancers. They have a less break-apart potential. So I'm selecting round dancers as we go. If you can hear, that's fine. Okay, I project well anyhow, right? I'm always reminded in this kind of discussion of Deuce Williams' comment that the most difficult sight-calling job he ever had in this regard was one time he had to call for 8 nuns. Is Takazaki in the hall? Taki, you here? Our Japanese caller here will confirm this. We had the good fortune to go to Japan a number of years ago, and it is true. They're all about that height, and they all indeed do look alike. And it's very difficult. And they had club costumes on, the whole scene. It's very tough. I found an interesting thing happen, though. And this is really, I'm not quite sure how relevant this is, but it was very interesting to me. While they did indeed, I had difficulty keeping them apart in my mind, looking at the group out there. When during the break I would interact with one individual, when I would get somebody, we would talk to each other, or attempt to talk to each other, the minute there was a one-on-one with an individual dancer, that person I could pick out. That was very interesting. And so I made it a point then, during my stay in Japan, during every break to talk to lots of people. And when I did that, that made them stand out for me. I was able to do that. This might have some help here. In any event, the first process for any side caller is to select the people. One of the problems that might occur from time to time is to, and I'm sure side callers out here will agree to this, you start your pick and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to pick somebody. Right? What do? Most of the time, you will have this sickening realization after the first command or two, and you can still, if you say head couple square through and do a swing through, you're still in control of that. You quickly say, boys, run, wheel, and deal, and as they wheel in there, you can nail 4 people real quick. But you do That is one of the dangers. The discipline is to train yourself to do that. We know some callers who write down the people. That might be an interesting thing during the first tip. Look at someone, you just write down, blue couple, red couple. Or Sam and Frank and Mary and Joe. So the selection of people is next. Pick them, stick them up. Yes, sir, another question. The question is, have you ever used... I suppose, can you pick one couple in one square and another couple in the adjacent position but in another square? Is that what you're saying? Have you ever done... I've never done that. No, that would frighten me to death. It's an interesting puzzle, though, and if you have any luck with it, please let me know. Yes. One of the things that I find happens is that when I'm picking more than one square, if I pick 1 and 4 here, I will try to get a 2 and 3 in my other square. No, he said one couple per square. I take couples 1 and 4 in this, 1 and 4 in this square, and I will own them. Then I will take couples 2 and 3 in another square. That gives me a handle on both the heads and the sides. But he's asking couple 1 in this square and couple 4 in that square, and using those two. Oh, you haven't. You have a security blanket over here. Oh, why would you want to do that except for game? I see. I suppose you can do that. I have no problem with that. I never have done it though. To answer your question. What happens if your pilot square goes on the tube? I pray a lot. I cry a lot. What I do. I want to save the next portion, pick'em, which, in my view, is the most important thing for later on, because it's what you do before you resolve. And it turns out that is one of the most important phases of the sight calling operation. Then you want to pair them and snare them. That's the resolution process. Someone on the line pairs somebody, and then snare and find some way to get them back to the home position, or hopefully with an interesting Alaman left, or a surprise right and left grand, or something along that line. So those are the 4 processes or the 4 steps that go along. And I prefaced our discussion here with that kind of an introduction, so that when we talk about some of the other things in sight calling, you'll have that as an overview and that to relate it to. We have 2 gentlemen on the panel with us who will be talking to in a moment. We have, on my immediate right here, Dave Kenney from Colorado, and Gary Shoemake from Texas now. Is that right? What we thought we might do is to have Gary take the microphone next and give you some insights on resolution techniques, and then ask questions of Gary, and then Dave will take the microphone and give you some insights on how, for those of you who are starting to sight call, or who are not yet sight calling but would like to, give you some insights on how to get started in sight. And then I will take the microphone again, and whatever holes they have left, I'll try to fill up. And then we'll have as much question and answer as our time will allow. So without any further response, let's go out to Gary.
Well, when I first started to learn to sight call was about 10 years ago, and the problem was a little easier then because we didn't have quite so much to work with as we do now. And it was also kind of in a self-defense type situation. I found myself at a stage where a lot of us go through, and I thought I was about the greatest caller that God ever blessed. That there wasn't too much anybody could teach me. And I had the fortune to be able to work a full week's program with Jerry Haig and Laurel Mann. And on Sunday night of this full week program, they very quickly and very nicely called, and the dancers danced my entire workshop for the week. On Sunday night. And we have to go until the following Saturday morning. Now, this is not too unusual to see these guys to be able to know all this already, but the problem being the dancers knew it too. So very quickly I became not the greatest thing that ever happened, but all of a sudden not only were the two callers I was working with better, all the dancers were better, you know. They could, all this stuff I've been working on. But to get back to the point of what I was saying, I had, on that week, I had to learn. That week I had to learn to psycho. As such. Being the nice gentlemen that they are, they kind of took me under their wing, and the things that they workshopped, we usually had an hour and a half workshop, I think it was. And one of them would take a 30-minute session, and the other one take a 30-minute session, and I got to bring up the rear end of the whole thing. So, while Jerry was workshopping Spin a Web, I think that was about it, back along those times, something like that, Burl was over the side saying, now, you can use it here, and you can use it in place of this, and this is where it leaves you, and if you'll just do it right here like this, you'll come out, and everything will be okay. And then while Burl was up calling his whatever it was, Jerry was saying, now, you can use it in place of this, and it will do this, and it'll leave you over here, and if you'll use it right there, it'll be okay, you know. And so for that first hour, I'm sitting over there cramming. You do this, you do that, and I'm writing it all down. So but the last 30 minutes becomes a test, because I had to get up there and not teach them anything new, because I didn't know anything new, you know. But my salvation was they saved me for the program all that week, is because they said, okay, we'll just let him review what we've already taught you, you know, give you a little practice on it. Well, that's good. So we got up and reviewed for an hour. But within that hour, I had to be able to know and be able to use what they had just taught those people. So it was a very quick chance to life and death situation on site calling, because you had to do it. Site calling, the way that I look at site calling, and everybody looks at it a little bit different, I look at it very mathematically in my own mind. Site calling is starting with zero. Your starting point is zero, and your answer is zero, always. You start with a squared set, which is zero. Everyone in their home position, everyone with their partner, that is zero. You can add any movement that you want to. You can, and sometimes in addition, it also subtracts. Some moves that you add to it will move you to a different spot, which will, in essence, subtract you. The furthest you can get away is 4. The very furthest you can get away is 4, because there's only 4 positions. So the most complicated call, with the exception of some of the challenge calls where you get on the bias and you can go 5/8 and this sort of thing, the very furthest you can get away from home is 4, and really isn't that, it's 2. It's the very furthest you can get away from home. You know, you can make it as complicated as you want to. You can talk about this over here and that over there. The very most complicated, the very furthest you can get away from home is out of sequence. Let's face it, if we got them in sequence, and really sequence is the key to the whole thing, if you've got them in sequence, we can always, as a last resort, promenade back home and chain the ladies, if we had to. Now, that's not very good dancing, very nice dancing, and you'll agree with me that too. But the very furthest that you can get away from home is out of sequence, because we can always move the girls anywhere we want to. The key to getting everyone back home And it's not always the left allemande, as everybody is very aware of right now. It can be a right and left grand, or it can just be a promenade home. It don't have to be an allemande left. That is the most common. So we're always going back to the corner, but you don't have to go back to the corner. But the answer, again, is 0. You always try to, within this equation that you're building, that you're adding a square to, plus a right and left to, plus a V to the left, plus a circulate, plus a ACDC, or relay to DC, or whatever you're doing. The furthest you can get away from home is out of sequence. And then you can move the girls wherever you want to. The problem, as I found it when I first started, goes back to memory. It all becomes memory. Every bit of it becomes memory. Because no matter what call you use, you must know where it starts, and you must know where it ends, and you must memorize that. There's no way that you can just start calling the call and hope that it starts there, and hope that the next call that you're going to may have in your mind would fit into where that leaves you. You've got to know it. You have to know where that call is going to leave you, and you've got to know where you're going to start with it. So that is memory work. You have to know that when you start out, that this guy in the red shirt is dancing with that girl in the yellow dress, and her corner is, or his corner is, you've got to know that. So for that moment, you've got to expand that memory right there. The next thing that I feel that you should do, and we're talking about, get back to the resolve part of it, is expand your memory. If you're out of sequence with your right-hand lady, what can you do? If you're out of sequence with your opposite lady, what can you do? What are your options? If you're out of sequence with your corner lady, what can you do? If you're out of sequence with your partner, what can you do? These are the things that you must sit down and you must look at and you must memorize. Because there's going to be a time when you're sight calling that you're going to get so far out of it, that square is going to go down, that square is going to go down. Possibly that one back in the back going to say, no, you ain't got it yet. We've danced everything you've done and you ain't getting close, bud. But if you can move them to a spot that you recognize, then you can resolve that square. With their help, of course. But still in all, you must memorize. You can get down to all of it you want to, all the spikes you want to, all the burnt image you want to. Everything still comes back down to you must expand that memory, and you must sit down and do some work on it. If you're going to resolve, you must be able to resolve from most all positions. Now remember, keeping in mind that there's only 4. You can't be any one of them. You can put them in any one of them. The big key to the whole thing is in sequence, out of sequence. That's the whole thing. You've got to be in sequence to get back to 0. You get all the boys back to their 0 spot, like I say, and we can always chain the ladies if we have to. We can always head them in to the center and make a star like we've all had to do at one time or other in our career, okay? That's always that's the last thing we want to do. But you must sit down. Now, the greatest help that was ever to me, and I'm sure that these are available now, the greatest help to me when I first started this, along with that program, was Les Gator's book that he had. He had a workshop-type book. It was like homework. He'd write a break, starting with head square through right on down. Over the side, it would have 2 boxes. After this line, are they in sequence or are they out of sequence? After the next line, are they in sequence or are they out of sequence? After the next line, are they in or are they out? All the way through, and of course, he got you back to everything that he wrote down. But it made you concentrate and made you think of that. Well, you say, well, how do we know for sure if they are out of sequence or in sequence? If you can mentally, in your mind, make all the men face to the center from wherever they are. If it's in an 8-chain 2, if it's in an ocean wave, if it's in a line of 4, that's no problem. That's the easiest way. But if you can mentally, from that position, if you can stop long enough and quickly think about it enough that you can make all the men at that spot face to the center, If the number 4 man is to the left of number 1, they're in sequence, no matter where they're at. If you can mentally make them do that. If you can mentally do that to yourself real quick, then it's not, like I say, it's not so much of a problem. You can move it around to the right-hand girl. You can move it around to the opposite girl. You can move it around to the corner girl. But there again, you must be able to memorize and know what your options are to get back to the corner from there. There are numerous ways, just in numerous ways that you can do this. There are a few basic ways. I would suggest that you start with a few of the basic things. If you know that you're with your corner and you're out of sequence, what you can do with that. If you know that you're with your opposite and you're out of sequence or in sequence, what you can do with that. If you know that you're with your right-hand lady in sequence or out of sequence, what you can do with that. What your options are from that position out there. Get about 2 or 3 that you know and you can remember, then start playing with it. Start playing with your sight calling and get them to those spots and resolve them from there. I just see so many people making it so much more complicated than what it really is. To me, maybe I was fortunate, I don't know, but it never seemed that just because of the fact that I had to do it, in that one situation I'm talking about, but the most complicated call that you can get can never get you more than out of sequence. That's the most it can do for you, That's the worst you can do is out of sequence. And if you can get back in sequence, we can get everybody back home. It's not any bigger problem than that. So with that, you'll quit thinking about it so much as the people are so mixed up. They can't ever be that far mixed up. The most the men can be is out of sequence. Now, they can be all over the square. You can switch that square and you can revolve that square around to several different spots. But the very worst they can be is out of sequence. And if they're out of sequence, you get them back in sequence, we can get them back home. If they have to circle or promenade. The key to the whole thing is getting them back with the correct lady to promenade, or back to the correct corner to do an Allemande left and promenade back home. That is what the criteria that we have established today. That's maybe not the best route. There may be somebody come up tomorrow with the best thing to do. That's better than doing a square through 3/4 round to a left Allemande and promenade back home, or right and left grand and get back home. And I'm sure it will be. Because basically, all square dancing is mathematics. That's really all it amounts to. It is a mathematical program. You are building an equation. You start with 0, and your answer is 0. And the person that can build the longest equation and get the dancers through it becomes the challenge caller. And the ones that still stay with 2 plus 2 equal 4 doesn't make them any worse, but they are still working a mathematical equation. But your answer is always 0, because you're bringing those people right back to their original home, to their original starting spot, with their original corner and their original partner. The answer has to be 0. The worst you can do is get the men out of sequence. You can get the girls, I'm not putting too much emphasis or importance, you might say, on the girls' positioning, but as a last resort, and I am putting importance on it because it is important that you correctly do this. You know that as well as I do. But still, as a last resort, when you are working with resolving the square, as a last possible resort, we can chain the ladies. That option is always there. But you also know that any time that you get them back with all their partners, and if you're not in sequence, it means somebody has to cut across the back home, so your answer is not 0. You didn't come up with the right answer. So, with that in mind, what was the first few words you had? The parum snam on the end of it? Pick'em, sick'em, parum snam. Right. Pick'em. No, not pick it. Pick'em, yeah. But the most important part I think about in all of that thing right there, and that's a very good series of words to make you remember the things that you should do with it. But keep in mind that all of those, all along, all 4 of those, in every situation there, we still must dance them. Okay? That's the key to making all four of those things right there should equal dance them at the same time. Question? Right. No, that's my own approach to it, as far as I know. There's been a little comment on it from time to time, but if you think about it, basically there is a plus and a negative. There's a positive and a negative. There's a positive when you're in sequence. There's a negative when you're out of sequence, and that's really all it amounts to. You got to be a positive zero. When you get back home, you should be back with your partner, and you should be in the same spot that you started, so that you can start another equation, and you have to start from zero, and the answer has to be zero so that you can start another equation. The start and the answer are the same. You have a positive situation for in sequence. You have a negative situation for out of sequence. The very worst any call can give you. You can write the most elongated combination call in the world. That it takes part of a relay reducer and a part of a motivate and a part of a load the boat in between it with 4 or 5 curly keys in between, and you can give it this one name. And it takes 15 minutes to get through it. And the very worst it can do to the men is put them out of sequence. The very worst it can do is put them out of sequence. It can move the ladies all over the place, but we can handle that. We do that with singing calls every time. We move the ladies all over the place. The thing I guess that I'm trying to say to you more than anything else, don't make it so complicated. When you're looking at the beginning to start sight calling, don't worry about it being so complicated. It's not that awfully complicated. The very worst you can be is out of sequence as far as the men is concerned, because we've got to promenade to get them back home. If you get them back in sequence, the men, we can promenade them back to their zero position. We hope that when we promenade them back to their zero position, they're with their original partner. That's our goal. So that when we get back there, we can do that. But if we don't, we can always correct that also from that 0 point for the men. But 0 means that you are with, all the men are in their original starting position, and they are with their original partner that they started with. And the very worst that you can do for the men with any call is to put them out of sequence. There are several ways that, your options from there are this, and your options from there are several different things. You have to study that part of it, and you have to memorize what you can do to get out of it when you're first starting out. If, as you go along, there's other things that you will know that you can do, and it's like anything else. You know that you can, out of sequence, cross trail through to a left Allemande. You know that you can do that, okay? Well, if you'll sit down and study your options when you're with the right-hand lady and you're out of sequence, you can cross trail through and pass one and do an Allemande left. It's the same thing. Those are your options that you have. So you should sit down and study your options. As long as you are in sequence or out of sequence, what your options are with whichever lady you're with, to resolve at a certain point. So any given point, you will be able to resolve with any one of these 3 ladies. As long as you're with your partner in sequence, it's no problem to resolve. We can promenade home. But then you should study, really the things that you should study is how to get back to your home, but get back to your original partner so you can promenade home if you're out of sequence with your right-hand lady, if you're out of sequence with your opposite lady, if you're out of sequence with your corner lady, or in sequence in these same situations. That's really all you have to worry about. And you can, but in the same token, anything you must call, you must also memorize where it starts. I'm not talking about with who it starts with or anything else. What formation it starts in, what formation it leaves you in, so that you know what your options are there. But still, all calling just has got to start back to memory work. And you must expand that memory. You must be able to stretch it and cram a little bit more in there to it, so that your options are a lot larger than to dive through and square through 3/4 every time. Because if you've got to get them back to that one spot to dive through and square through 3/4 round, then you've got to really scramble them. You've got to be able to move them back over to that certain spot. And I'm sure that that's what Bill means by pair them and snare them. But in the same token, if you know what your options are If you're with your right-hand lady and she's out of sequence, and you are out of sequence, then you snared it, and all you got to do is pair them back up with the right people from that position. So I've gone about as far as I can with it. Do you have any questions? Questions? If you are using calls and if it is a gimmick type call, then again, at that type, that's what I call a gimmick type call, where you have couples number 1 and couple number 2 do a right and left through. All of a sudden you have those 2 people out of sequence, but the other 2 people across the hall are in sequence. And so in order to get it back to 0, then you must change those people back in the same token, or change the other people so that they're all, the heads are out of sequence or the heads are in sequence. But you can't change one couple of heads and one couple of sides. If you do that, then all of a sudden we've got one side of the square doing one thing and the other side of the square doing another thing, and it doesn't zero, it doesn't equal, it doesn't right on. I can't today say it's got a hell of a mess. Right. So, any other questions that I might? Yes. Well, that's true. You have the same situation, but you don't take the blame for that. See, they take the blame for that, and you are right. You can still, as far as the resolve comes out, if you get 1 in 4 boys back with their partners, or back with their original starting place with their partners, and 2 and 4 don't get there. And that's because our 1 and 3 get out of the way over there, and that's their fault, you know. Oh, sure, it sure is. It sure is. No, that's when you look down there and smile because they're saying, man, he screwed up, didn't he, again? You just look down and smile and say, yeah, I done it again, and take the blame for it and go on, because they're not going to take the blame for it, you know. It's a question. Mm-hmm. Okay. The question was, if this, I'm not sure I understood it. If this happens inadvertently, is that what you meant to say? Not on purpose, in this number one man and number 2 man gets out of sequence, and the 3 and 4 do not. Is there a easy, simple way to get them back into their position?
The problem that situation creates, and the problem that the special command creates, and the problem that the people who forget to trade create, is that you take a symmetric square and make it unsymmetric. Now, there is indeed a number of resolution techniques, and they've been published, dealing with resolving unsymmetric squares. But your problem isn't solved easily, because if it happens in one square only, you may indeed be able to resolve that square, get those people back home, but because the rest of the floor did not make the same mistake that they did, you'll get them home, but no one else. So it doesn't solve your problem. The unsymmetric resolution techniques are effective if you, on purpose, deliberately create an unsymmetric situation and make the whole floor unsymmetric, and then use those techniques to restore symmetry and get the square back home again. But in the situations you described, other than saying, hey, you 2 guys forgot to trade, you know, other than doing something like that, you really can't solve that. That's one of the advantages, obviously, of having more than one pilot square. else. And I hope that while I was watching them, they didn't do something equally silly. Because and those things happen. And sure, that is indeed, the question was, is that's one of the perils of sight calling. Sure it is. But on balance, I think the pluses far outweigh the occasional minus that you'll find there. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Not necessarily, no. The question is, you have to keep, if you're doing sight and you have a handle on couples 1 and 4 and they're partners, you have to know more than that if you want to be able to keep track of right-hand ladies and corners and so on. And my answer to that is, I don't think you do. If you know the right-hand lady of your key man, if you can tell, because as he said, they're only 2 people away. You're never more than 2 people away. In any one, if you have couples 1 and 4, you have a corner arrangement, don't you? And you can see where that corner is. If she's in the opposite position, then you know the other girl then must be the right-hand lady. You can deduce all that. Now, that is indeed difficult. That's one of the upper echelon sophisticated windows that we look at sight through, but it can indeed be done. The technique that is more and more now coming into play is a resolution technique that, for lack of a better name, some of the guys are calling snapshot. And that is, as you're calling, you didn't intend to engineer it, you didn't make it happen, but as you're calling, suddenly you recognize, pow, oh, look what I have here. Everyone's with their corner, and they're all in sequence. And you can, if you own that, if you have a number of get-outs from that, in sequence or out of sequence or whatever, if you know where you are, your hands on the wheel at that point, then you can do that. But you can indeed deduce, by just those 4, what the makeup of the square is. You just need 4 people to tell you who has whom all over the square. Any other questions? I'll turn it over to Dave. Dave?
I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about getting yourself involved into sight calling. I think Gary mentioned his experiences getting into sight calling. I wasn't forced into learning how to sight call in 1 week. In fact, it took me a little longer than that. But I think it probably took me about 6 months to get the ideas and the basics of sight calling and the confidence in myself, my ability to be able to resolve a square. It took a little longer than that to be able to recognize certain key situations when they would develop as I was calling. There's several different type of sight calling methods. An isolated or burnt image type of a sight calling method, where you're going to just recognize one particular position. Let me say as an example, like from a box 1-4, and that's going to be your starting position. Then using isolated sight, you're going to watch one particular box on the floor, maybe in 2 or 3 squares, whatever we're talking about. But what we do is memorize 2 people instead of 2 couples or whatever. And what we're going to do is we're going to call things within that box that they can do. And there's a whole world of material you can do. And I find quite often dancers don't really realize that they're dancing in one little spot and they haven't moved. Now, I don't recommend you do that all night. But as far as when you're first getting yourself started, you memorize your number 1 man and his corner, as an example, from a box formation. You know, all you have to do is call some calls, bring the dancers back to that one position, you're ready to do an Allo man left. The same thing if you start off with the heads leading to the right, circle through a line. So like you know you've got your partner with you, you're on the left-hand side of the line, but there's a box right there in front of you. So you do a star through, you do your things in your box, you bring them back to your line again, your 1-2 2 line position, and you're ready to resolve the square. You in other words, just continue using box-type formation figures. You start off right away, guys, with calling, moving dancers all over the place, and there's a panic situation that hits you. My God, I forgot who belongs to who, or a few times you do reverse, you keep your primary and your secondary couple. Sometimes you get those reversed. It takes the time when you start to expand on your methods of calling, take the time to sit down and write down. I write it down all the time. I write down sometimes 2 and 3 couples, 2 and 3 squares, so that I've got the confidence builder of knowing that I do have these things written down here. If I do get lost, I can look down and refresh my memory on some squares that I've written down. Sometimes, like at mainstream dances most of the time, I might write down 1 or 2 squares, and then I'll use 2 different squares usually to sight call on. And if they go down, I have the backup or the assistance of 2 more squares that I've written down. Of course, I don't do all this on the first tip, but as you move along and you progress and your methods improve and your confidence improves, and I think your confidence in yourself and in the dancer's ability to get through what you're calling is probably one of the biggest hurdles you're going to have to cross over. And once you get that confidence built up, you're going to be able to go with it. I suggest, as you're starting to call and starting to use sight calling, as an example, it's the first tip in the evening and I watch out here on the dance floor. Hey, I got a couple in blue. Fantastic. Number 1 couple. That's going to be my key couple. So I memorize the number 4 couple. And by the way, you don't have to put it in that type of a sequence. All right? You can have number 3 and number 2 or number whichever way that you want to do it. Or maybe you recognize the gals first, so you use number 1 couple, number 2 couple. It's number 1 lady and number 2 man that you're matching up. Doesn't make any difference in that respect. You'll start to vary your program as far as that goes. Most of the time when you resolve the square anyway, they're somewhere else. They're nowhere near a home position. But what I like to do when I'm sight calling in is this number 1 couple, this primary couple that I have up front that's beautifully matched. Okay, and I got a pink couple on the left that's never that lucky, but at any rate, that number 1 couple, my first tip, they are a primary couple for the rest of the night as long as I call. They are burnt into my memory from the first tip. I will never use that couple as a secondary couple. They will always be a primary couple throughout the rest of the evening, no matter where they dance, unless it's in the back 40 somewhere and I can't see them. A lot of times then what I'll do is I'll pick a second couple that becomes a primary couple in another square, and the same thing throughout the rest of the evening. So by the end of the second tip, normally by doing this, I can have sometimes 2 and 4 couples memorized that are going to last me for the rest of the evening. And by memorizing the first time, it's much easier to pick up on them the second time. The first tip, maybe I've got the couple in blue and I've got this other couple that I know, or a couple in pink, or whatever they are. Sometimes I can be lucky on other tips then to use that original secondary couple as a primary couple in another square at a different time. And these are just little things that I think that you have as far as being able to key in on people. We all know colors help, especially where you know the dancers on your home programs. It's much easier to recognize people. But I think on the home program then, it's a lot easier to get people confused with, you know, you're going to get your primary and you're going to get your secondary reversed. It's a lot easier in your home program because, you know, everybody is familiar. When you're on the road and you are able to pick out key people that you can recognize throughout the evening, it's less probable that you're going to get them confused and get them reversed. But again, I suggest you write them down, and it helps. At home especially, where you're knowing the people, just take a second and write down 1 or 2 couples in each square. Another method of sight calling is the full sight calling, which is where you have to recognize the 2 couples in the square. Again, the mirror image takes care of the other 2 couples. We also have the isolated sight that I was talking about, where you watch 2 people, head man in his corner, and you just work within a little box before, as you build up your practice, your confidence, and make yourself, as you're starting to do this, force yourself into using sight. Either at a class where you're teaching, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to work swing through tonight. So you have the head square through 4 hands. Okay, and you watch number 1 man and number 4 lady, and you're going to swing through 1,000 times and do a couple of other little basics that perhaps dancers know. And then when you're ready to get out of it, and one nice thing about this at a class is, oh my God, I forgot. You can say, okay, We've walked through it, square your sets up, and we'll go. But force yourself into that. You'll only have to use that get out a few times, but pretty soon you'll start to remember, and you're going to be able to resolve the square. The swing through probably isn't so difficult, but at any rate, it's making you work, and you're working with material that's not memorized up here when you're walking them through. You've memorized only one swing through, or maybe only two swing throughs. So you get used to bringing the dancers back into that element position. You just start working with other calls, something that's going to move somebody across to the other side. Now, this is when maybe you're going to have to start knowing two couples rather than two people. Okay? But, and guys, you've got to know all those calls that are on the list. Don't get caught in the pass-through, bend the line, right and left through syndrome, as I like to call it. All right? If one of those sequences doesn't do it, it's not going to do any good to do it again. Try other things that are going to move dancers around. If you're in sequence, out of sequence, that doesn't bother me so much as I'm calling when I'm trying to match people up. If I'm trying to match people up, I'm trying to bring them together. And I'm not really aware myself at that time until I have matched at least one couple up in that square. I start looking for sequences of where's the corner are they with partners. Use calls that usually mess the dancers up on you, like a spin chain through, or a all-aid circulate, or a walk and dodge, or flutter wheel, or something like this. Calls that normally mess things up on the floor and separate people. You can also use these calls to bring people back together. And then you can go from there to resolve your square. I think one thing we should point out, we're talking about in sequence and out of sequence, and all you have to do is a cross trail through. Well, sometimes you have to realize also, if you might only have two couples, the head couples as an example, paired up. You notice the boys are in sequence, but the sides haven't got their partner, and if you're in line, obviously that's not a cross-trail through situation. You want to look for, from that type of a setup, you want to look for a box get out rather than a line get out. Okay, so do a pass-through wheel and deal, or maybe a pass the ocean and a recycle. Some simple method like that that's going to put you back into a box for a box get out. Each call on this list, no matter what the level is, use each and every command that's on the level you're calling as a weapon for you to resolve the square. Don't just get into those pass-through bend the lines or star-through, dive-through, pass-throughs. They very seldom bring people together. They can if you know how to move people around. But if they don't do it the first time, it's not going to do any good to do a whole bunch of them and just sit there and spin your wheels all night. When you start, you hear that expression a lot, the caller is fishing. He's lost, trying to pair people up. And this is usually what happens, is you break away from your normal choreography and all of a sudden you're into this. And you've done 5 or 6 star-throughs and pass-throughs and bend the lines and dive-throughs and things like this, trying to match people up. And a lot of those calls, they just keep everybody apart. They don't bring anybody together. So just, kind of keep that in mind as you're trying to resolve the square. Do we have any questions? Yeah. The question is for you in the back. How many of you are new, relatively new, at sight calling? Okay, quite a few.
recognizing perhaps in the sequence, outer sequence position
Circulates and trades will do an awful lot. I want to mention one thing. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of things written on site calling and methods of resolving the squares. And they probably got all the answers in probably any one of the books that you might want to buy. You were asking about circulates and trades as far as resolving the squares. They do a wonderful job, but the problem is you have to recognize when you can use those, when you can use something else. So don't rely too much on a circulates and trades, because all of a sudden you're going to be in a situation you're going to call circulate and trade and it won't work. You know. So maybe at that time, that's the time a pass-through and the bend the line would work, you know. But at any rate, circulates and trades are good ammunition for, just as an example, I got a question, but just a second. If you're in lines and you see that you've got your partner down on the other side, you're trying to match, and you do a pass the ocean. If you do an all-eight circulate at that time, you're going to pass each other right through the middle. You know, where'd you go? Went the other way. So at that particular time, you would want to insert center's trade before the all-eight circulate. Then if you do an all-eight circulate, then you're going to bring two people together. If you were trying to match, and then you do whatever you're going to do from there to, you know, recycle, and then you've got them paired. Well, in the meantime, you can move on that. Question in the back. I'm going to turn that question over to Bill.
It's difficult. First of all, let me tell you the reason we haven't done that so far. It's difficult to guess beforehand how many guys here are already able to do that. For those of you who can, very quickly, let me present three very, very short, easy resolution techniques that can be used right now. One of them has been touched upon, and it's called two people sight. If you can bring have the heads lead to the right and have a line of four, and then look at couple number one, and know where their footprints are, and just work couple 1 and 4, and you can do two couples, just those two couples, do anything you want to, and whenever you're ready to resolve the square, bring couple number 1 back to those footprints. Restore them to those footprints without crossing the wall over there to the other couple. You just wait those two couples. Anytime you bring them back in the footprints, you know you can Allo man left, or call a right and left through cross trail, or start through square 3. You know you can do that. That's the simplest way, and I urge callers who are starting out to learn how to do that. That comes easier. Those two couples 1 and 4, you can also, and this is a technique Jack Lassery talks about a lot, put a rubber band around them and move them all around the square as long as they stay in their own foursome. You're still doing two couple sight, but you're moving them around the square. And you can have the couples circulate, and they're still in the same. You can still put a rubber band around, bend the line. You have them in the same line. Pass through and bend it again. You have them as facing couples now. So that's the next step. Learn how to do that a little bit. The final step, the most involved one, is to use the two key couples as a means of restoring order to the square and engineering the square. The simplest way that I use is to, when I'm ready to resolve, I will form a normal two-phase line, parallel two-phase lines. And at that point, as Gary pointed out, no one is ever more than 2 places away from his partner. No one. And at that point, you either circulate the ends of the centers, the boys or the girls, to their original, but pair up one of the key people with their partner. When you have them paired, check the other of your key couple. They will either be paired or unpaired. You have one couple paired, and the other couple must be either paired or not paired. If they are paired, you bend the line, you're either in sequence or out. That's, by the way, the only time that I worry about sequence is at that particular point. I don't monitor sequence all the way through. At that point, if they are paired, if everyone is paired up, they're either, I bend the line, we're in lines of 4, we're either in sequence or out. We're 1P, 2P, ready for the Allo man left, or 1P, 2P, out of sequence, cross trail the Allo man left. Now, if the situation is the other couple is not paired, they are with their opposite lady at that point, they're still in two-phase lines, I will see to it that I will do a Ferris wheel, and for a beginner, I would say the thing to do is have the couple circulate first so that the paired couple is facing out. And then do your Ferris wheel. And then look where the corner is, and it's either a pass-through or a square-through 3 away. Must be. Yes. Yes. Oh, well, thank you. You're welcome. Aren't you glad you came?
I have one comment on I have one comment on that, which is really why I didn't dwell too much in that resolving business, is because as you're calling, you've got about a split second to remember everything he just said. You know, well, but what he said is absolutely right. The thing is, your own experiences, guys, as you're working and building your own sight calling abilities and techniques, you're going to come to all these same conclusions. But what the problem you're going to have, and this sometimes really gets discouraging, is you can't remember what Bill just said or what you read in a book. All the information is accurate and is correct, but it's a whole lot to learn and be able to recall on a split second. You're going to have to really work and develop one step at a time or 2 steps at a time or whatever you're going to do as you improve and get your own confidence built up. That's just a little... Yeah.
Well, the best thing you can do, you use his method, but the best thing you can do is develop your own methods. Okay? This is what I was trying to say a while ago with memory work. Use his to the fullest extent, but the very best thing that you can do in learning to sight call is to get your dolls out and put these people in these positions and sight call with these dolls as opposed to out there on that square, because those dolls will wait for you, but those dancers will not. Okay? You can forget about timing. You can forget about everything else. Sit down and test this thing with the dolls before they do it. If you're going to start sight calling, I would recommend every caller that is going to start sight calling, sure use this. I can give you a resolved situation too. If you're out of sequence, you can cross trail through to the corner. That's if you're with your partner. So it only is logical that if you're with your right-hand lady, if you cross trail through and skip one girl, you can get to your corner. If you're with your opposite lady, you cross trail through and skip 2 girls, you can get to your corner. If you're with your corner, cross trail through and skip 3 girls, you can get to your corner. Okay? That's from lines of 4. You can test that, but you're not going to recognize that until you sit down and work on it. Now, you can do it with dancers. If you've got a square of dancers that will stop, get you to the spot and you say, okay, now let's see what we can do from right here. If you've got the time to do that and you've got dancers to do that. But you still must take the time to sit down and work with your dolls, your programs, what have you. There again, it goes back to mathematics. There are innumerous, it's unlimited, the ways that you can resolve that square, even though there's only 4 numbers out there. It's just, with the combinations that we have, you can do it with a relay reducer. If you know that, but you've got to know it. And we can sit down and give you all these things, and you're going to sit down and memorize them, but it's not really going to work. You've got to sit down, and you've got to move these people, and you've got to say, all right, what would happen if I done this? And you say, oh, well, looky there. And you got time to stop and look at it. Oh, wow, look at that. All I have to do from there is to slide through, and I get to the corner. Wow, that makes an impression. That all of a sudden is there in your mind, and the next time you see that situation when you're calling, you say, all right, I got him now, boy. And you slip right into that left man. But that's because you've done the work. We can't do the work for you. You've got to do the work. We can tell you, you can sit down and I could take 5 seconds and tell you everything I know about it, And you could put it on a tape recorder, and you could play it back every time you call a dance, but it's not going to help you until you get out there and apply it, and you've got to do it. Best place to do it is before you go out to that dance. You should know something about it before you go out there. And then as you recognize these things you have taught yourself and you have learned yourself, then apply them as you go. Questions, anybody? Yes. I'm sure we could probably recommend that may happen.
I will see that input is provided. We have 4 minutes left, people. I'd like to be sure that we touch one very, very important subject inside calling that has not been touched on yet. I don't want to let this discussion go by without at least inserting the idea into the conversation. We've been, and naturally, discussing for the most part resolution technique. How do you get out of side calling? We just briefly skimmed on the surface of what do you do before you're ready to resolve. And in my view, it turns out that is really the most important part of a side caller's job. Side calling, the ability to resolve a square, allows a caller the freedom to improvise. That's really why we like to do it. It lets you create choreography as you're going. Well, what we're really saying is, I'm now going to, before we trusted our memory, we wrote down routine after routine after routine, and we memorized it, and we learned how to do that, and there was a conscious programming process that went on. Now we're programming on the spur of the moment, right now. And that spur of the moment decision-making with each and every command that you call is really what side calling is all about. The resolution processes have really become very easy. These little cookbook recipes that we have for doing that, they're easily learned. You have to work at it, but it is not hard to do. But you have to, if you put in the work and put in the time, put in the practice, you learn how to do that. What is important, though, is now that you can do this, what do you do? Here I am. There's 8 people out there. I have to entertain them. I can get them back home. And I know many, many marvelous side callers who call a very, very accurate, dull dance. And that's a problem. And I want you to consider that. And even experienced side callers, think about that very carefully. What do you do before you allow a man left? In my opinion, it turns out to be a function of how familiar a caller is with formations, the formations that commands will put you into. The technique or the skill that a side caller has to acquire in this phase of side calling is the ability to know before he calls a command what the ensuing, resulting formation is going to be. How many of you here have ever called a particular command and said, oh my gosh, look what I got here, what do I do with that? All of a sudden there you are, and I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, the thing is, ideally, I don't say it doesn't happen to me. It happened to me last night. My goodness, what do I do with that? The ideal situation is we should never be surprised by the ending of formation. We should know that beforehand. And I said should. I don't say always, That's the ideal. But along with that, hand in hand, part and parcel with that, is the other technique of also knowing when you're in the situation what your command options are. What are the actual commands that are now available to you? He called it the right and left through dive through pass-through syndrome. You're doing the same thing over and over again because you can't create that fast. Well, you should know in any situation how many command options do you have. And then you make programming judgments, which ones will suit your programming needs of the moment right now. Jim Mayo calls that fast decision-making micro-programming. With every command, you make a decision. Now, I orient that to formations. I like to think a good practice technique and something that a really good side caller really must be able to do, and many of them do, is to know every single formation, lines, boxes, waves, columns, diamonds, quarter tags. I don't care what the formation is, to be able to, one, set up that formation, and to quickly normalize that formation. You must know, let's take lines, for example, you must be able to quickly, at your discretion and at your fingertip ability, be able to set up all 6 symmetric void drill arrangements within a line. Within an 8-chain through, there are 6. Within a diamond, twin diamonds, there are 6. In columns, there are 6 kind of columns. And your choreography, your game plan on any given night is going to require you to set those arrangements up and then to normalize them. And that's the technique that you want to work on once you know how to resolve. Now, there's a value in having that cookbook recipe kind of thing that the gentleman in the back was asking about, because until you have that, until you're secure in the knowledge that no matter what happens when I'm experimenting, I know I can resolve them home by using step 1, 2, 3, and 4. You need that security blanket at the end. But once you have that, then you have to learn how to move the people comfortably, smoothly, and put them into the arrangement that you want them to be in, and to make whatever programming judgments that you have to have. That's a very important phase of it. I'm sure you guys would agree with that. If you don't even talk to me. Any questions? We have a few minutes left for questions. Let's take them if we can. Or are we out of time? I'm glad you have no questions. Thank you, guys. It was great. Thank you, guys. You were super.